Well, it's Sybil's book club. I was going to say it's Sybil, but it's Sybil, and we're talking books today with Maiysha Kai. She is the lifestyle editor of the Griot. And welcome, Maiysha. You and I are going to be talking books today.
Sybil, this is a pleasure. I'm so excited. I love books since I was a child, so it is so exciting. And I love books so much, I created a whole podcast about it. I host the Griot's Writing Black on the Griot Black Podcast Network. So we are so thrilled that you wanted to highlight some of our picks. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Absolutely, and I love talking books. I've loved books is my entire life, thanks to my mom, Chicago public school teacher. But
Mine too.
also,
Yes.
yeah, is that right? Oh,
Yes, that's
wonderful,
true.
wonderful. That's awesome. Um, but my reading started a little earlier than most because my mom did not drive for the first 2 to 3 years of my life, and so we
Wow.
took Chicago public transportation. And so my mother was a reader, and in order to keep me occupied on a bus or on a train, she would read to me what she was reading,
Oh, I love
and
that.
that's how it started for me. And now at Christmas time, everybody knows this, and they don't look forward to Auntie Sybil's books. But that's what I give to kids for Christmas, not the toys, not the clothes, and all that kind of stuff. I give them books, and so my love of books is and reading is genuine, and I want to share that with them. How
Well,
about
listen,
you?
we
How's
have
your
a lot of parallels because, so I'm my mother's only child, and I can't,
thing?
my story is not quite as endearing as yours, but apparently I taught myself to read at 3 years old
That's
because
impressive.
would walk up to people who would visit the house, and I would walk up to them with a book and I'd say, read it me. I would demand that they read me. And, obviously, not everybody would comply to my
Sure.
demand. And so I taught myself because I was tired of asking. They were not reading to me fast enough. And so I taught myself. But I too, I'm an auntie, a very proud auntie and godmother. And I too love gifting books this time of season, this time of year, really all year. Kids will get books from me all year round. I think it's the greatest gift you can give a kid is the gift of imagination. Like I used to lose myself in books, and along with the development of language skills and
Yeah.
fascination about the world and inquisitive nature. Like these are all things that books foster. And it's it's an inexpensive gift, as much as we all kind of look at Amazon side-eyed.
Right. Right.
It's easy to get a book. You can get it there quickly. You can order a book now and get it there by the holiday.
Hmm.
So I always think they're the ideal book the ideal gift, for children all the way up through seniors. I think there's a book for everybody. I always say that there's a book for
And
everybody.
I don't know if you like this as much as I do, but if people tell me what their interests are, especially like they tell me that what their kids are into these days, and then I like going and finding because they're like, he's not really a reader. And I'm like, well, give me a
That's a
chance.
challenge for me. Yeah,
Right.
tell me you're not a reader. I will find a book that you will love.
Yeah.
That is one of my favorite things to do. Is
Yeah.
to prove you wrong, prove to you that you are a reader and that there's something that you're going to love. Absolutely.
And sometimes I get, photos by text and saying, you're not going to believe this. And they show me the picture of the kid reading the book. And I'm like, yes.
And they couldn't put it down. Right.
No, no. And it's like, who'd have thunk it? That, like, well,
There
I
you
I
go.
kind of did. I was hoping.
I mean, listen,
Anyway,
books are magic, and people, we live in a world where we prioritize, television and film and
right.
streaming, but so much of that starts as books. They start as narratives. Like writing is not a lost art. None of the stuff that you're watching exists without writers, and so, this is just the organic streaming, and you get to put whatever you want it to look like, in your brain. Um,
Absolutely.
that's so fun.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Are you a hardcore hardback, paperback book reader, or are
I
you into the audiobooks now?
I do listen, I do love the tactile feeling of a book.
Hmm.
I love curling up. I'm sure you can see I have created my own little zone here. This is also my studio for writing Black, but I created it this way because I will sit here and read the books that I, profile of the authors that I profile on the show. And I love that. I think also because it has a lot of nostalgia for me to sit there and
Hmm.
turn pages and the smell of books. But listen, we're all busy people. I know that there's a whole community of book talkers out there and people who are really, into books, who really feel like hard copy is the only way to go. But they're not these days. We can carry a book in our pockets, via our phone. We can carry it in our earphones. And I think, like, however you get into narratives and reading, maybe it's not reading in the classical sense, but
Right.
listening to a book is such a great way to get through one quickly. And in
Mhm.
certain cases, especially when you're talking about like biographies and memoirs, to hear somebody tell their own story in their own voice is also
Right.
something really like special and evocative. So yeah, I think any way you get to it is good. I don't have a superiority complex about books.
I Listening to books has become an acquired taste for me,
Yes.
and sometimes listening to that person tell their story doesn't always work for me, and then I will go back to the book. I That's just full disclosure on my part. But I'm a radio person. That's my background, and so having conversations or hearing conversations on the radio now lends itself to listening to people and reading
Absolutely.
their
Like
books.
those of us who spend a lot of time in our cars, I know you're in Dallas, I'm in Chicago. These are both big cities with cars and expressways and traffic. And,
Hmm.
like it can be really calming,
Hmm.
to listen to a book. Again, if you're a person who's on public transportation, like, okay, so maybe you don't want to tote a book around with you, but you,
Right.
you got one in your pocket, or you got one in your ears. Like all of these are such, these are the moments I think technology is doing something right. It's bringing this really classical and enduring art form. And I really believe in protecting books. I believe in, protecting narratives, all kinds of narratives. We're living, unfortunately, once again, in an era where people are banning books. And so I think it's
Hmm.
more important than ever that we encourage people to keep picking them up, to pick up the challenging stories and to really engage with them. I think, there's just no better time to be a book lover. Frankly,
Yeah.
there's some great stuff coming out, and particularly,
Wow.
listen, my market is Black books.
Hmm.
We here at the Griot, that's our core demographic. That's who we serve.
Right.
I do think Black books are for everybody, so there's that.
Right.
But in terms of Black authors, I don't know that there's been a better time to be a Black author since maybe the Harlem Renaissance.
Hmm.
Maybe the Black arts movement, but really we're seeing again this like resurgence and this interest of Black stories, and that is so exciting for me as a reader to see. Anytime you see yourself reflected
Right.
in any kind of art form, I think it's really affirming and reminds you of what we're capable of in this world that can feel too huge and too anti-Black sometimes. So it's really
Yeah. And very separate sometimes, but
yeah.
so you're merging different cultures, and for both, for the reader and for the person
Mhm.
who's written the book, and perhaps closing that divide that exists far too often, and a chasm that really can be closed with the written word.
Listen, even I mean, even for those of us, on this side of the proverbial pond, as
Mhm.
it were, I think, even if you never get a chance to travel to the continent, right? Like if you don't get to
Mhm.
go to Africa, and I mean, Africa being a continent, the amount of work that's coming out of Africa, African
Yeah.
authors are like so prolific, and they're, West Africa, South Africa, East Africa, like they're all over.
All
You're
different.
getting
Yeah.
these great stories that really give you a way to kind of touch base with a culture that you might not be able to do it with physically.
Mhm.
And all that's exciting. Black British authors, great stuff coming out of there. So, I could go on, and I always do because I love books. I think there is something to be said for championing books and really fighting for their survival and their
Absolutely.
existence.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
we also our focus is on African American authors and their stories. This is something we've done with the Tom Joyner Show for years. And when
Hmm.
we initially brought up the idea, my executive producer Yolanda and I, Tom wasn't too crazy about it. And then this woman by the name of Oprah came up with her book club.
Hey now,
Okay. And Tom came to us and said, got an idea. And we're like, really?
do you
Okay.
now?
Yeah. Wow, what a unique idea. And so we started it, and we did it on the cruise for many years, but we also did it on the radio through podcasts and what have you. And back in the day, Elin Harris was an early favorite of ours, and was
Absolutely.
became a friend, and Walter Mosley and Tina McElroy Anza is all of these people have become friends because I am such a fan of their works, and so.
Mhm.
And we did not get a chance to do it on this last cruise, but I do like to talk to my friends, the authors, as often as possible. So most recently, I've been concentrating on children's books, and that's a part of your list too, isn't it?
Absolutely. So we produce this list every year, or at least every year that I've been there. That's now I'm closing out my second year at the Griot after many years in Black
Happy
media.
anniversary.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. We're having a good time. And I just like you, I created this podcast. They came to me, they said, "We think you should do a podcast." And I said, "I know what I want to do. I want to do Black books." I had hosted a Black book podcast at my last media job. And I was like, I love doing this. I have these, connections. And really, the saddest part to me is that we can't cover everybody on the podcast.
Right.
So I really try with these lists to fit in some folks that we haven't already, and to really also just get into get into the fact that there's something for everybody there. And so for kids this year, that's always a fun demographic to shop for. One of my favorite books that, and this is actually a sequel, and one of the reasons I love this, I had today one of our directors of development slacks me and she says, "Hey, I was reading your book guide and I didn't know that there was a sequel to The Marvelers." And I was like, "Yeah, man, it came out this." She's like, I got it in my hands." I was like, "Oh, who are you giving to?" She's like, "Girl, it's for me."
I love it.
So, that's what I mean. Black YA is huge right now, right? So that's one of my favorite books, The Marvelers. I think is like an amazing book for kids. I've given it to my 8-year-old goddaughter, and my director of development is in her 40s. So, you get the picture there.
Sure.
That's really exciting. There's quite a few. I'm
also, if I may, it's also a bridge, because if you think about, a 40-year-old woman and an 8-year-old and having the conversation or listening in on the conversation between them is really quite enlightening, I think.
No, absolutely. And I think, again, it reminds me of you talking about your mom on the bus. It's that same kind of communion that you can have. We often think of children's books as okay, kid, go take this and
see spot run. See.
Right. It's really not. I mean, one of the books I recommended this year was, most of the books we put on the list are 2023 books, but, one that always sticks out to me that I had to highlight again this year was forgive me, it's not by a Black author, but it is the first children's book to feature a Black protagonist, which is
I know. I'm so excited.
My heart for this book is so huge. I may or may not own the little plushie toy myself.
I bet you if you go this way or that way, we might see it in your bag.
He's hanging out. Peter's over here somewhere. Little Peter in the city, a little city kid who's enjoying the first snow of the season and his little adventures and his little red snowsuit. But, this was a book that as a child, I mean, much like, I'm from a generation, I'm Gen X. So I'm from a generation that Sesame Street was probably not even 10 years old when I was born. Right. And that was a show that was created for us. It was not created entirely by us, but just like Sesame Street, Jack Ezra Keats did this series of books that centers this Black child. And it really changed, I think, the game for what people thought was possible. It's a Caldecott winner. And I think people had not really considered centering us before. And so for this white man to do this, really allow little Black kids to see themselves, little Black and brown children, really, I think was so magical. And I think it maintains its magic. It still holds up. When I read this to the little people in my life, they're getting bigger by the second, but when I read it to them, you see their little faces light up and they're just pointing at the pages and they're so excited. So I think if you have a really little person in your life, that is an exciting book to gift them, because it's just kind of one of those first endearing things. And it really does, it it lasts, you know, it really, it holds up. 60 years later, it still holds up for me.
Exactly. And not to give too much information to my friend Justice who is watching, but her Sweet Baby True, this is the first book I bought for her. And True just turned a year old, and
I
I
love it.
can't wait to give it to her for Christmas. And they read every day,
I
he
love
and
it.
her mom. And so that is, and I was so grateful to you for you putting it on your list, because I don't think I could ever take it off my list.
No, I
You know what I
can't.
mean?
Yeah, I
Yeah.
can't do it. I can't do it. It is hands down one of my favorite stories of all time. And again, you know, we like to stick to Black authors mostly, but this is where I make, you know, sometimes you got to make an exception, and this is one of them. I think, you know, when we talk about what inclusion looks like, you
Right.
know, this is an incredible example of, you know, someone who didn't have to and did, right? So,
Exactly.
and it's so meaningful. It really is.
I really regret, not being able to meet him and to thank him
Yeah,
for this, because
yeah.
it is such a gift. So the Snowy Day is the book we're talking about by Jack Ezra Keats. And what are any of the others that you want to highlight in
Oh my
the?
gosh, there were so many this year. So let's see. We talked about The Marvelers, which is
Hmm.
a total treat. I'm also really a huge fan of Jason Reynolds. So Jason Reynolds is an
Yes.
prolific YA author. He's, you know, I mean, he's won tons of awards, and he's like the most down to earth like dude, right? And
Hmm.
you know, one of my favorite books. I mean, he has a few, but he did
He
two
really does. He
this
has
year.
quite a library
He's
himself.
got it's huge. It's huge. And there's a lot of collaborations on it. He's collaborated
Hmm.
with Ibram X. Kendi, all these sort of people. There is a children's book that I do like for younger readers, because most of his stuff is YA.
Hmm.
But there were three of his books that stood out to me this year, one of which is called A Party for Langston. And yes, that's Langston as in Langston Hughes. And it really, you know, I think gives kids this lens into these great Black writers and this, you know, this amazing literary legacy that we come from, you know, that
Right.
is ours. And I think it's such a great way to introduce kids to that,
Hmm.
legacy,
Hmm.
you know, because again, the beautiful thing about books is that, you know, great writers are also great readers. So if you're fostering a young reader, you know, what you're giving them in terms of just not only their language and their knowledge of the world, but their confidence in
Yes.
writing, you know, it's untold. It really is a gift that keeps on giving. So that was one I loved this year. And also Jason, I think, you know, another thing that we do run into sometimes, you know, we see these demographics about education. I'm a former teacher. My mother's a former teacher. My
Hmm.
stepmother's a former teacher, you know, and we see these numbers about literacy. We see Black teachers complaining about how, you know, kids are missing linguistic skills and interpretive skills, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And particularly, I find that unfortunately, I don't think Black boys are encouraged to read
Hmm.
as much as they
Right.
could be. And I love Jason for this because his books really center young Black male protagonists. A lot of them do, you know.
Right.
So Stunt Boy is another series
Hmm.
that I think was
Hmm.
great. Made my list this year. You know, it also has a graphic novel quality, so you kind of get a little bit of that like comic book moment going. And I think that like kids really respond to that. They really love
Very
that.
much so.
Um, yeah, absolutely. Jacqueline Woodson is another favorite of mine.
She
Another one
is.
with extensive
Wow.
library. We
Yeah.
used to be neighbors when I lived in Brooklyn. So shout out to
Is that
Jacqueline.
right? Oh,
Park Slope.
nice.
That's right. I lived in New York for a long time.
Are
Um,
you running from the law in any of these stops along the way?
no,
You sound like you're a radio person, or just kind of running from because
you
you've got
know, it's
some
media. It's
warrants.
media. I actually have my background's actually in fashion. You know, so
Oh,
I was
wow.
and in music and entertainment. So I was doing fashion and entertainment in you know in the city for a long time. I also went to
Hmm.
college in New York, so you know it was one of those cases where you're there and you just stay. And I've
Right.
recently only in the last decade have I come home to Chicago. But you know, you'll see in my selections, you know, a lot of that New York still leaks in.
Yeah,
And
you've got
Jacqueline,
yeah, that theme and that tenor to you.
yeah,
That
man.
yeah.
So now I'm a New Yorker in Chicago, but yeah, I mean, I lived there longer than anywhere else. But Jacqueline is one of those authors, you know. You know,
She
she's a
writes
Brooklyn
so
girl.
beautifully. Oh,
She does, and she's got this. She just released a novel this year called "Remember Us." It's really poignant. I think you know it really speaks to how difficult it is to. I mean, just coming of age is difficult. How difficult it
hmm.
is to adjust. I mean, the beautiful thing about YA novels, like when they really hit. I mean, all books really, but you know, it's about empathy. This chord of empathy, and especially I think for kids you know, at that really tender transitional age, letting them know that they're not alone. What they're
Right.
feeling is not, it's not weird. It's not, you know, all of this is like, you know, natural. And there's somebody else out there who feels like you and is going through the things that you're going through and can relate to
Mhm.
what it means to be the new kid or the, you know, the awkward kid or the what
Right.
have you, or the kid whose parents are going through divorce, you know, or what have you, you know.
Mhm.
And so I, you know, when I talk about like Jason and Jacqueline, I think that they are authors whose work really resonates like that. Kwame Alexander's another one that I would recommend, you know, and
Mhm.
again, you don't have to pick their most recent book. These are people who had like deep benches of
Yeah.
books at this point. But there's such a great way, you know, like when I was a kid, you know, when you read a bunch of sequels, it was like Sweet Valley High or like, you know, or
The
maybe Anna
Babysitter's
Green
Club.
Gables, you know, it's like
Yeah.
maybe
Yeah.
Anna Green Gables. So now it's like there's books like that for us and for our
Mhm.
kids and for, you know, for brown and black kids. And I love that. I just love that.
So one of the challenges that I have is growing with the kids
Yeah.
in my life and talking to their moms, like a set of twins.
Mhm.
The young lady, the girl in the twinship, she's into horror.
Okay.
So looking for black horror and for YA, okay, a
Okay.
young adult. They are 13 years old. Her brother hates all things horror, but he is big on history and sports. And so it's really interesting in trying to engage them when we're in the same place talking about, because he's like la 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 la. I don't want to hear anything that's scary, and she doesn't care anything about his love of Jackie Robinson, or anything like that. But I find the adventure in finding the books for them is really great. Like I discovered in looking for horror themes,
Hmm.
something that's really special and with black authors. And so that's opened up a whole new world for me.
Absolutely. Listen, black horror is huge right now.
Yeah.
And it's interesting, you know, I think we are finally, and this is a controversial topic sometimes, but
Hmm.
I think we are finally, um, as a community, I think there's beginning to be enough content out there that we can, I think, get a little less precious about, you know, what that looks like. You know, I think
Right.
for a while there was some rightful, like some absolutely understandable concerns about like, is this trauma porn? Like, do we want to see black horror stories? Do we want, you know, and the fact is like, you know, we want adventure just like anybody else. We like all those kind of things. We, you know, like a lot of us grew up, you know, I'm not a horror person.
Yeah, I'm not either. At night I'm watching Hallmark Christmas movies, so I really don't.
But you
That's
know,
that's not my thing. But I
yeah,
want her. I want to give her all that I can find,
yeah.
to enhance her library.
Yeah, I mean, you know, I don't know as much about, I will admit, I don't know as much about Black YA horror
Hmm.
yet. There are some great titles out there. I totally, you know, I totally recommend, please look at our holiday book guide because there's a
And
lot of
and
stuff in
so
this
that
trans.
brings me to the point.
Yeah.
Maiysha Kai is my guest here, and she is with the Griot, the lifestyle editor. How can people find you and follow you?
So you can find me at the Griot on the Griot Black Podcast Network. I'm the host of Writing Black. This is where we feature Black writers. We have guests on all the time, a lot of celebrity guests we've had on our
Hmm.
midst lately, which has been awesome. But we also publish quite a few book lists. So, you know, right now we're in the middle of our holiday book list. This is,
Right.
you know, but, you know, Black History Month's coming up. We'll be talking about Black love, you know, so our book lists are things that we do kind of all year round, you know,
Sure.
depending on, you know, when we get to Women's History Month, we're going to be talking about a lot of amazing Black female authors. I mean, and listen, there's been some great stuff that's come out even recently, like, you know, this incredible anthology of Ntozake Shange's work came out recently.
Yeah.
That's amazing. Another book by a white author, but
Hmm.
that was so needed was The Sisterhood. This like
That's the one
unification.
that I wanted to talk to you about because
Yes,
that's on my list as well.
yes. You know, like I think that first of all, you know, I went to a predominantly women's college and
Hmm.
you know, Black
You go to
feminism.
Barnard?
No, I went to Sarah Lawrence. Close.
Okay. Okay.
Very close. No, but you know, Black women's words are really what got me through college. In fact, I chose Sarah Lawrence because Alice Walker had gone to Sarah
Yeah. Yeah.
Lawrence. You know,
Yeah.
she didn't graduate, but you know, she left. But my point being that, you know, our words, our stories, like, getting into people like Bell Hooks
Mm-hmm.
or Ntozake or, uh, Toni Morrison, Audre Lorde, all of them. It's been so vital, I think, to
Mm-hmm.
my livelihood. I also think that, like, um, because feminism, particularly Black feminism, is often, I think, misinterpreted and kind of
Yeah.
vilified. It's been really exciting to see some new works come out that kind of demystify that for people and really show them what it's really about and how powerful these women were, not just in the lexicon, but to each other, that this was
Right.
part of a really intricate support system.
Right.
I've had the pleasure of interviewing Nikki Giovanni a few times in the
Mm-hmm.
last couple of years. And, it's incredible to have a living legend amongst us,
Sure.
but also, to have somebody who talks about her closest, Toni Morrison being among her closest friends and,
Yeah.
really understanding, that in a world that often likes to pit us against each other, that these
Mm-hmm.
were women who found their communities and really reinforced each other and made each other better.
And
And
lifted each other up instead of,
absolutely,
the whole reality TV thing of ripping each other apart.
absolutely,
Yeah, I love
absolutely.
that. Yeah.
Yeah, me too. I mean, that was so powerful to me. So I was really grateful that Courtney Thorson wrote that book and really put that together and did that research, because I really felt like, it was so vital. Similarly, another book that a white academic put out this year. This is so wild. I'm talking about so many white authors. I'm going to get off of it. But The Gospel According to James Baldwin
Yes.
was another one that really stuck out to me this year. This idea of Baldwin, who we know as a literary giant.
Mm-hmm.
And, we even know as an activist, we know how powerful his words are, his messages, but, not necessarily his recognition or giving him the recognition he deserves.
Deserves.
As somebody who was really influential to a lot of the major civil rights leaders that we know, he was the one, kind of back there, much like we're talking about Bayard Rustin this year,
Yes.
who, again, another great children's book came out on Bayard
I
Rustin
was
this year.
going to say,
Yeah,
that was when you think of Bayard Rustin and children's books, you don't put
you
those two
don't.
together.
You don't, but how great is that exists? Like, I think it's
Yeah.
so cool that it exists and that it's able to exist now.
Right.
Because this is the world that children live in, like you can shelter children to a certain extent,
Sure.
but then there's things they shouldn't be sheltered from, which is just the humanity of other people,
That's right.
and allowing people to be themselves and to be powerful and to exist, as they are and get the credit they deserve. I mean, this is a man who galvanized, 200,000 people.
Right. He turned the civil rights movement around
Absolutely.
in one event.
He orchestrated a pivotal moment that we still benefit from today.
Yeah.
And so I'm so excited that this is a year that we are able to celebrate him. And same thing with Baldwin. I'll never stop celebrating James Baldwin. He's been tremendous for me as both a writer and editor. I mean, a reader all across the board. So
and a bon vivant too. Don't forget, he had quite the life.
Absolutely.
I want to go back to the Sisterhood because, as you mentioned, it is about. It's called "How a Network of Black Women Writers Changed American Culture," and it tells the story of Toni Morrison and Alice Walker and several other women. I think Audre Lorde was a part of that group.
I feel like she's in it. June Jordan's in it. Tony K. Lombard. There's a. You're right. It's like a.
Is Paul Marshall in there too?
I gotta hold on.
I want to say, but these are extraordinary Black female writers, and they got together on the regular. They would have drinks. They would eat gumbo. They would do all just sisters getting together and having these wonderful conversations and lifting each other up. That's
absolutely
the beauty of it.
Absolutely. And, listen, I can honestly say, and I'm sure you could say the same, these are the communities that reflect our own communities. This is really what we do. Like, don't let media tell you otherwise. Don't let any kind of show or narrative tell you otherwise. I can say as a writer, a lot of my closest friends are writers. They just are.
Right.
I think of people like Disha Philia is amazing. Brittany Cooper, Tarana Burke, these are people that I know that I can call, Tanisha Ford, who put out Our Secret Society this year, which is an incredible book that really, discusses another unsung hero of the civil rights movement, Molly Moon, all of these women are women that I'm really grateful that I can, bounce Jenny Lumet, bounce in on and say, hey, how are you doing? Or, hey, I need a thing. Or, hey,
What do you think of the book about your grandmother? It's like
that part. So yeah, there's just some like that is what it's really about, that kind of organic community, that thing that I think Black people have always done,
Right.
to see it spill over into our professional spaces. And those are the spaces I think that, especially in a traditionally white world of publishing, to see these women be that support for each other, I think that's why I think it's so inspirational. That's why it made the list, because, as much as I love to put fun stuff on, a lot of the books that I choose for the holidays are books that, I think give something that you would want to give to somebody else, whether it's reassurance or inspiration or healing. I mean, I had a whole book list go out yesterday on the Griot that was just like about books that were all about just being inspired and healing. And they ran the gamut from books on financial freedom to spiritual based things. I got a book from TD Jakes. I also had a book from Jeezy. Because again, there's something for everybody. There's a story for you out there, and you will see yourself in it. And once you do, you're going to want more.
Exactly. You're going to want it. Yeah. Yep. It's a constant need to fill whatever that emptiness is, or to increase your knowledge. We are talking to Maiysha K. She's a lifestyle editor of the Griot and also the host of a wonderful podcast, Writing Black. Let's continue through the list because we're running a little short on time, and I do want to give you the opportunity to talk about not just books that we agree on, but some of the books that you recommend and have on your very influential list.
Very extensive list, but okay, there were books that we agree on, and then there's a book that nobody agrees on, but I'm going to endorse it anyway.
Okay.
One of my favorite reads this year. I'm almost ducking right now. Worthy by Jada Pinkett Smith.
Yeah.
It was a good read. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
That was a good read. And not for the reason people think.
Right.
People, I think, and I know this because I've been a journalist as long as I have, and I'm sure you know this too. Obviously, the job of media is to, we need you to come in and, we want you to engage. And so it is to pick out the little juiciest bits. But of the 416 pages, and that book is 416 pages. Of the 416 pages of that book, the parts that most of us latched on to, the revelations, weren't necessarily that new, but also they were very minor in the context of this bigger story.
In the grand scheme of the book.
Yeah. Absolutely. And I think that it was incredibly well written. I think it was I think it was more vulnerable than people give her credit for, really. And I did get to talk to Jada about this book, and I asked her flat out. I was like, so were you trying to set the record straight? And she was like, basically, she was like, to who? Anybody who's going to feel the way they feel about me is going to, that's their narrative.
Right.
But she did it for herself in many ways, and she did it for her kids to be able to kind of tell this truth. And I think that to me, it's ultimately a story about humanity. Like, however you feel about her, she's a human being. Right. And as sensational as Hollywood lives can be, and certainly Hollywood marriages, I thought it was a really, I thought it was significant exploration. I really do hope that, once all the fervor dies down a bit, people are really able to engage with it honestly and, with an open mind. And listen, I had to confess when I talked to her, I had not read Will Smith's biography. I'd had it on my shelf.
So that was I was going to ask you. Yeah,
I'd had it on my shelf for a year. And because I wasn't interviewing Will, and, you got to prioritize the authors you're actually talking to. Unfortunately, Will he didn't come on the show. Okay.
He's lost.
I just hadn't gotten to it yet, but I remember, I read her whole book in like 2 days. That's how good.
That's saying something.
Yeah. I read that whole book from cover to cover in 2 days. And then I walked right over to my bookshelf and picked up his and spent the next day reading his.
Wow.
And what I was actually struck by is what excellent companion pieces these two books are. We don't get a lot of opportunities to see that. Right. And interestingly enough, I mean, these are two books that came out, a year apart, essentially, and a lot happened in the space of that 1 year. And to hear her be able to talk about it kind of from an after the fact thing. But honestly, outside of that, what I didn't feel like people really owned up to is the fact that I was like, did you read either of these books? Because to me, I don't think she said much that he didn't say. He said the same,
Right.
So I thought it was really interesting. And I think it's been really telling, the response to that that narrative. But that was one of my, you know, listen, I mean, favorite might be strong, but it was, you know, it was a book I read really quickly. I really ate it up, and I did think it was great.
Did you? This is always a sign for me. Did you miss her after you finished reading the book?
That's a really good question. A little bit. I mean, you know, it wasn't like I was expecting to hang out with her or anything, but
right.
By the time that I met her, I felt like I had a better understanding of who this person was in a way that I couldn't have from any of her films or even from like Red Table Talk. I was just like, okay, I see what you're doing here. And I see, you know, like, listen, as a flawed individual myself, who is not proud of every single thing that's ever happened in my life, and who
but my life is not an open book.
Right, exactly. Right. Who doesn't have to play most of my life out on the public stage, you know? I had a tremendous amount of empathy leaving that book. And I think that that's really what it was about, you know, like so many of the things she was going through, I think are incredibly relatable, like, you know, and specifically when we have conversations about Black mental health, her transparency about some of those issues, I thought, you know, I was saddened to see got lost in the shuffle of some of the, you know, buzzier stuff. So again, I hope people will engage with it. Honestly, I think particularly for Black women, or, you know, people who identify as women, I think it can be really revelatory for them. Like, I think there's some opportunity there. Another one that really, really struck me, and this was a more recent read. I actually spoke with him last week. Tariq Trotter's The Upcycled Self.
Really?
Yes. Now this is interesting because I have my own, you know, I was a musician in my former career. And so I have a little bit of a history with the Roots. I've, you know, been a stan since 1994, you know, when I saw them here in Chicago. I performed with them on stage, like, you know, so I had a sense of who I thought Black thought was. In this book, I thought was so vulnerable and so deeply poignant, deeply, just deeply vulnerable, you know. And he said, you know, he spent a lot of his life being very guarded. I think, you know, he makes very clear the reasons behind that. And I thought that, you know, this book is kind of equal parts, like Jada's, which again, people didn't really tap into, that it's actually equal parts kind of self-help and memoir. At the same time, he's really kind of like offering this guide. And again, when we talk about Black male representation in books, I think it's so important that we have these kind of firsthand voices telling their stories.
Right.
You know, because we don't get that as much as we need. And I think he's somebody who is deeply relatable. You know, again, Jeezy came out with a memoir this past year. Chris Paul, you know, had a memoir. Kendrick Perkins had a memoir. You know, these are all guys who I think live in that lexicon for men of like machismo and, you know, like, and so to see them kind of deconstruct that. Harry Dunn, you know, the Capitol Police officer.
Yeah,
I'm looking forward to that. That's another one that made my list this year. Again, you know, these books where Black men are really kind of excavating something that some real genuine pain, you know, and doing it so honestly and selflessly, I would even say. It really touched me this year, like all the narratives I read. I again, Clint Smith, Above Ground, it's poetry, and not everybody gets into poetry.
Right.
Beautiful book for a man in your life, and particularly a father in your life, because it's really about fatherhood and Black fatherhood. Just there's so many gorgeous.
Did you read Courtney B. Vance's book?
I was just about to mention it, The Invisible Ache. Yes, The Invisible Ache, which he wrote with Dr. Smith. Now I haven't had a chance to get all the way into it. I read the excerpts I read were enough for it to make my list. Because again, you know, I am here for anything that empowers us, that affirms us. And again, you know, Black women need it, Black men need it too. And I think that this is, you know, I think read about a third of the book, you know, because again, unfortunately, Courtney has not come on the show yet. So prioritize some other reading. But I think he will. He seems like a very nice guy.
Angela will make sure of that.
I love it. No, but you know, what I loved about it was, you know, him taking some very personal pain, some very significant losses in his life, and galvanizing that into something that could be useful for our communities, something that is so deeply needed, a demographic that is often overlooked when we're having conversations about mental health, and who also faces these very, very unique and often targeting challenges in the world and in America in particular. And so The Invisible Ache, Black men identifying their pain and reclaiming their power is the full name of that book. And I think it's all right there in the title. Like I think if there's a brother in your life who you think could use some support, I think it's a great choice. Absolutely.
Right.
Or listen, anybody who needs to understand them.
That's the other part.
And empathize. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've talked biographies, we've talked
Yeah.
inspirational, we've talked
Mhm.
children. One that I did want to mention regarding children, and I'm just a big fan of his and all that he does, especially in his work in presenting young Black boys, and because that's his wheelhouse, that's where his kids are, is Derek Barnes.
Mhm.
Lava in My Veins is his latest, and it's a graphic novel. And I just love it so much because, as you mentioned, everybody is not meant for just reading the words on the page. And
That's
we
right.
found that the graphic novel is a way of getting young people, especially, and some older people,
Absolutely.
into that whole reading game. And he does a great job of it. And it came as a result of his own experiences with his son, who was not doing well in school.
Mhm.
And so it really is one of those books that he uses his experiences, but also something that a lot of people can identify with.
I love that. And I love the way that you described it as well, because I totally agree with you. I think that, we think of reading as this very static thing. And again, I think it can be really intimidating to some people, but there's so many ways to get into this, and it's not just for kids. I mean, Chuck D did a whole graphic novel
Right.
series this year, so like those stories are out there. They are there, and they're illustrated, and they're fun. And again, such a good way to get into stories and to escape for a little bit. We all need a little bit of escape, and it doesn't always have to be right in front of the TV.
Right.
You know?
And it's not just for little boys. This book is,
No,
it
it's quite
depicts a young
sophisticated. Yeah.
child on the cover, but I know that young girls who are having difficulties in school, and so it really opens up that world to them as well. And so I don't want you to just think that, oh, it's just about little Black boys. No, it is about our children and how they are able to perform and how they are encouraged in the
Absolutely.
classroom. Yeah.
Curl Friends is another one that,
Hmm.
I was talking about the Sweet Valley Highs, when I was a
Yeah.
kid. Curl Friends, we now have this for like little Black girls too.
Yeah.
We have these books where it's like you can follow little Black girls through the halls of the junior high, or, what have you. And so, we want to encourage Black readers. We also want to encourage Black writers, keep those stories coming. Please,
Hmm.
it's interesting that we're having this conversation in a year that American Fiction, the film, is,
Yes.
getting so well-deserved buzz.
Deserved. Yes.
Deserved buzz. I just saw it, and it's excellent. But and I don't want to spoil anything, but I would just say to Black writers, keep them coming. Don't be afraid to put us in the middle of your stories,
That's
because
right.
it really does resonate. I would be remiss if I don't talk about any histories, because I love a history book. Black history is not just for Black History Month, y'all.
Right.
It's just not. One of the ones that stands out, and I have to give him a shout out because he is my colleague. He's also my friend, Michael Harriot, Black AF History.
Yes.
Fun read. If you do not know Michael Harriot, if you are not one of the legions on Twitter who follow him,
Yes.
Listen, he is absolutely hilarious, number one, but he is also, a very thorough historian. He knows his stuff. He loves nothing more than research, and then putting that research into context that, is modern, and it's funny. It's often a little bit, satirical. It's wry, it's dry, it's fun. I got it. I had to shout that out.
Good for you.
Yeah, I had to
Yeah.
shout that out because that's my griot fam. He's also got a podcast on the Griot Black Podcast Network, so you can catch up with Michael on the Griot Daily. But read Black AF History, so much fun.
I was wondering about the age range for that, in terms of young people, because I really want to. I want to expose them to, historical things, but
yeah, I mean, I would say that Black AF History, from me, I would say that's a great book for like maybe your high schoolers and up.
mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? The ones who are already cursing, right?
Right.
So I would say, yes, that is a great book for them to get into. This is going to be for your like probably juniors
Mm-hmm.
on up,
Got
your
it.
juniors in high school. However, we were talking. I think I mentioned Ibram X. Kendi earlier. Ibram
Yes.
X. Kendi and Nick Stone got
Have,
together to do
yeah.
a YA version of Stamped
Mm-hmm.
from the beginning. So yet another. No, I'm sorry, I'm wrong. Jason Reynolds did Stamped from the beginning. I think it is
Yes.
How to Be an Anti-Racist. We now have a
Yes.
YA version of How to Be an Anti-Racist. That was what I was thinking about. So there is yet again a great YA option for maybe the young burgeoning activists in your life, or maybe the ones that you would love to just give a little more awareness of
Mm-hmm.
what's
Yeah.
going
Yeah.
on.
To raise it just a little bit. Um,
Absolutely.
I found that with giving the John Lewis books,
Mhm.
the graphic novels March 1, 2, and 3, was also a good introduction for them in terms of just this one young man who went, spanned the beginning of the civil rights movement into um, to George Floyd,
Yeah.
and just giving them a taste of it, and just and introducing them to
Well,
one
listen,
person who made such a difference.
I always like to tell this story about how when I was a kid, gosh, there were a handful of books that really,
Hmm.
lit up something in me. One of them, oddly enough, was like an entirely illustrated book of Shakespeare's stories, like
Hmm.
Shakespeare's plays condensed into story form with these like wild graphics and everything like that. Um, and that was what was available to me,
Hmm.
at that age.
Hmm. Hmm.
Along with things like The People Could Fly by Virginia Hamilton, and
Sure.
things like that. But again, you do walk away, with this understanding, and 20 years later, I'm finding myself teaching Shakespeare to kids because I have that, and knowing how to tell it to kids
Right.
because I had that early introduction. So yeah, don't shy away from the graphic novels, from the picture books, from all, they are such, they really do spark the imagination. They really, I think, encourage and really stoke this thirst for reading and for knowledge and just for more.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Well, you've done a great job in encouraging a lot of folks. There are so many books out there, and I encourage people to go and check out your recommendations because it is full. It's a volume unto itself.
Well, listen,
Of
you gave me a couple I need to add to that list. So I'm just, I was taking like, your stuff. And I was like, all right, now, yeah, is I going to add that one? No, I love that. Thank you so much. Yeah, you can find me at Writing Black on the Grio's Black Podcast Network, or you can come visit us at the Grio. I am always writing about books and all sorts of other things in the lifestyle section. So, Sybil, thank you so much for
Thank you. It's
having
been a
me on
great
here.
time, and I'd love to have this conversation again. I hope you will come back.
Anytime, anytime. So much fun.
Absolutely. Check out my new friend, Maiysha Kai, and at the Grio. And thank you so much for joining us. Happy holidays to all of you who are observing. And we look forward to seeing you in the new year. Take care and